Arsenal return to the Premier League with a match against Burnley, which takes on a little bit more significance than we ever thought possible at this stage. But Arsenal have put themselves into a position of precarious fascination, I suppose, is the right way to describe it, as our form in the league is pretty horrific. Burnley are our next opponents, and to be honest, from watching people on social media and from listening to your responses in our chat box over the week, the confidence is at an all-time low. So let's go ahead and preview this wondrous occasion against Burnley. Hello and welcome to the Gooner Talk, back again with you guys for another show. I am joined by Andy Jones from The Athletic. How are you doing, Andy? Are you well?
Yeah, not too bad. Yourself?
Yes. Well, I say yes. Yes. We'll go with yeah. We'll level out with a semi-positive yes right now. More to do with getting closer to Christmas than football, I suppose, is probably the way. In which I should say, your background is very Christmassy.
Yeah, it's not bad, is it? I mean, the lights might go a bit mental at one point, but I guess we'll deal with that as it happens.
We were putting ours up the other day, the ones outside the house, and we've got like that icicle setup going around.
Yeah.
And there is one that it looks a little bit like it's on LSD, partly. And then I thought ours were bad. Next door's come on, and it's like there's a rave going on across the entire close. It's ridiculous. But anyway, let's crack on with previewing Arsenal's game against Burnley. Now, it's an interesting fixture, I think, from both perspectives, because Burnley's record at the Emirates is horrific, it's fair to say. And I remember you coming on the channel last year when we were looking ahead to this game, Arsenal's form at home in the league in general is dreadful. So from a Burnley perspective, is there kind of a renewed sense of confidence that there's a possibility for you guys to take something away from the game?
I think so. I think when you look at sort of Arsenal's form, I mean, Burnley's form isn't much better. But I think the difference is Burnley's form's been trending up, whereas Arsenal's has probably been trending down. I guess in the league, obviously, the Europa League's a different kettle of fish. They've been strong there still. But though I think that there's a sense, maybe not confidence, but there's definitely not any fear. I think with Burnley going to the Emirates, I mean, last season will give them confidence. They played quite well. I think it was a bit of a Aubameyang brilliance to sort of win the game, and Arsenal played well, but Burnley did as well. So yeah, I mean, and when you look at, as you say, Arsenal's sort of current home form, there's sort of plenty to be sort of to take positively from it, from a Burnley perspective, moving forwards and sort of going there on Sunday night with a sense of they can get something, and it's not going to be one of those where it's how many's the score going to be.
One thing that's really interesting me about Burnley at the moment is the takeover situation. I remember writing a piece on it at the start of the season, and it was because I was covering Charlton and the situation that was going on with those guys, and then now you've become embroiled in part with that because of the personnel that's involved. I was concerned with the names that were brought up with Burnley taking over. What has the view from your side of things been on the whole thing?
Well, it's a continuous process, basically. I mean, there's two parties interested. The club came out with a statement. We broke the story of the second sort of bid. ALK have been sort of, there or thereabouts for the majority of the season. And then the Egyptian bid, with some of the people from, as you mentioned, the Charlton, who were, sort of involved with the Charlton situation. But yeah, it's I mean, both from what I understand, both parties are confident, equally in themselves that they are going to. I mean, it looks like ALK seems to be sort of in the front seat at the moment, but it's so difficult to tell because you sort of just getting told different things. And as I say, both sides seem really confident. So it's one of those that you feel it needs to happen before January so they can try and get the foot in the door, basically assess things and try and offer a budget for the window, because if there isn't a takeover, it's very difficult to see there being much money available, especially when you see the lack of spending in the summer. You probably assume that will continue unless a takeover comes through. But obviously, we've only got 2-3 weeks left before that. So it's all up in the air a little bit at the moment, and it's a case of wait and see. I mean, discussions should continue to go on. It feels like it's coming towards the end, and a decision seems imminent, but then it's been like that for the last sort of few weeks. So it's just a case of continuing to monitor it, and hopefully from a Burnley perspective, the guys that do come in and do take over, have got the club's best interests at heart, the current board, and making sure that that's the case. And hopefully they can, try and take Burnley on, to the next level, sort of financially, I guess.
Yeah, it's a really strange environment to look at a club, for instance, going through a takeover process. From an Arsenal perspective, I know that a lot of Arsenal fans are very disillusioned with kind of the ownership at Arsenal. The lack of spending the club has done it in the right way. Arsenal has spent a hell of a lot of money over the last few seasons or so, but it's the way that it's been spent that's been of the frustration to many fans. What interests me most, though, going into this game is obviously towards the lineups that we've predicted. So let's have a look at those. Talk me through your team selection for the game.
So it'll be so that is the 11 that played against or started against Everton and played well. It was a good performance from Burnley. I think options don't necessarily help. And sort of this, you'd say this is probably as close to a first 11 as you're going to get. Maybe Goodmanson for Brady, but Goodmanson's fitness issues, like Brady's really for the last sort of 18 months, 2 years have really hindered him. And Goodmanson's sort of been touch and go labelled for the game, but it sort of seemed less likely that he'd play. And Robbie Brady came in against Everton after having his own sort of little hamstring injury from the international break, and was brilliant. Scored a superb goal, looked really lively. You sort of feel for him every time he picks up a knock, because when he first came into Burnley, the first sort of 6 months, he was brilliant. Or sort of the first year, I guess, nearly. Sort of at the back end of one season, coming into the next one, and then suffered a horrible injury, and it just completely knocked him, and he's not really been able to find his groove since. He's not really been able to put performances together week on week, staying fit. And Dwight McNeil coming in on the left hasn't necessarily helped that situation, because he's then moved down the pecking order a little bit. But he looked really good against Everton. He'll provide. He's left-footed, so Dyche likes the sort of inside winger, if you like, who can cut inside, but also can, on the occasion, go outside on that right-hand side, which is why he sort of used Hendrick, for example, in the past, Brownhill, to sort of, it helps with the shape and the structure of it being more narrow, and therefore it's difficult to play through. And then you sort of, the rest sort of speaks for itself. The back four has been in good form. Obviously, you've got your Pope, me, and Tarkowski. That trio is so crucial to the foundation and of what Burnley are all about. And then Rodriguez has come into the side for Ashley Barnes in recent weeks. He started against Palace and started against Everton. He's been really good. I think he's a brilliant player. I think he's really intelligent in his movements and in the way he picks up pockets, links to play. And then you look on the left hand side, Dwight McNeil is the creative spark. He's the man you sort of look to create the chances for the top two. And sort of produce the moments of quality that you're looking for, which Burnley, aren't going to have probably many opportunities to get forward.
You'd be surprised.
But I think even with Burnley, I guess when you look at some of the teams who Arsenal play, that there's a lot of pace on the counter, and Burnley sort of lack that a little bit. McNeil's not the quickest by any stretch of the imagination, so. But you are looking at him. He's the one who drives the ball forwards. He's excellent in the dribble. His dribble success rate is up from last season quite considerably. So, he's getting more confident deciding when to dribble, and he can, pick a ball up deep and, get you to the, up 20, 30, 40 yards up the other side of the pitch.
What impresses me most about, and I don't mean to come across the wrong way, but when you look at kind of the quality on paper of a lot of the players, and the lack of spending that does go on at Burnley, it is a massive props to Sean Dyche for the job that he does. You look at the teams that are around Burnley, which isn't in any way an insult, because Arsenal are one of the teams in and around Burnley right now. But down that end of the league, where typically there is that fight to try and survive, you look at the teams that come up that go in and spend money. Leeds have come up, spent money. You look at the season that Fulham came up the first time. They came in, spent loads of money under Jokanovic. This season, not as much, but still have spent. And all the teams around you continually spend, and yet Burnley are restricted in that area of the pitch, and yet they seem to just form that kind of team spirit, I suppose, but it's more the chemistry, I suppose, between the players and how Dyche gets them playing that makes you so kind of difficult to beat and consistent in the league.
Yeah, I mean, there's a culture. I mean, that runs throughout the club, not just necessarily the first 11, which they sort of, put in from day one. Another thing he put in from day one was a framework and a structure which he wanted this team to play with. I spoke to Ian Woan for an interview a couple of months ago, and sort of the idea was that the how, and there's no disrespect to him, but they were too open for Dyche and Woan's liking, and the idea was to implement something which got them solid, and then once you build that solid base, then you can allow your attacking players to go and be free and try and create. And that defensive structure's never changed. It's so key to what Burnley do. It's how they build their victories. Because if you keep, it's as stupid as it sounds, if you keep one side out, then you've got a better chance of winning. Obviously, yeah. But that's the basis of it, and it's all about trying to limit the opposition, nullify their threats, and then go from there and try and play long passes up to Wood, Rodriguez, try and win the second balls, and then play efficiently and effectively to try and score goals. And that's something he sort of brought in from day one. And as you say, that the budget is very small, and teams can outspend them pretty easily these days, but I think it's a credit to Dyche and his coaching staff for the development of the players and extracting the most out of them as possible. They consistently overachieved. They overachieved to be in the Premier League, really. Two the last 3 years, top 10 finishes, which is remarkable. But what he does is he plays to a team. He plays to his team's strength. He looks at players, sees what's best in their game, and then adapts his team to fit that all together into 11 players all pointing in the same direction. And he's done that brilliantly. And obviously the start of the season not been ideal, but it's why there's no doubt in him at the moment about the fact that Burnley can turn this around.
Yeah, and Burnley obviously will obviously fight for that, and the players are always seemingly behind the manager and are willing to do what he wants in the side, and that gives them, when you look at kind of the disconnect, I suppose, between some teams that do go down between the managers throughout the season, be it more than one, and kind of failing to get those ideas across, even with the disparity in quality. Burnley have always looked to be a side that combat the league really well in what they want to do and how they set up and how they want to play. Last thing to talk about, which is more of a comedic thing, I suppose, with Dyche, before we go on to the Arsenal lineup, is the way he is in interviews, in the press conferences about the referee, particularly. It's just something I enjoy about Sean Dyche, is that he's like a kid on FIFA, is the best way to describe it. Is that it is never the FIFA player's fault when they lose. It is always something else. And with Dyche, I just get that same kind of feeling around him. You're in the press conferences, or you were when obviously we could be. When he's in a press conference, is there any temptation to go, look, Sean, look, it just wasn't our day today. There wasn't really anything to blame with the referee. I mean, the one against Everton and then the lead up to the goal, like when he argued that there was a foul, but he said that in his mind it wouldn't be a foul, but in today's rules it has to be considered a foul. It must be entertaining being in the same room as him sometimes and going through that rhetoric.
I mean, it is. I mean, to be fair to him, he does, when his team's beaten and well beaten, he admits it and he goes, we were off it. And he has done this. He's held his hand up and gone, listen, we were the better team today and we didn't deserve anything. I think I do understand some of his points, and sort of, and I know the problem is because he says it a lot, and he even admits it himself, he's the only one who talks about it, and therefore it's always centered on him as the person who's sort of fighting his own fight. He's the one fireman with the hose running into the burning house, and there's no one else around him type thing. And so, but I do understand, like I could see his point about the Ashley Westwood Everton foul. It was soft, and I didn't think it was a definite foul at all, but I could understand his point of view, that maybe certain players might have got that decision on another day, and there was fouls later in that game where there was virtually the same contact, but it was a foul, and you go, well, I think he wants consistency. I think that's the key, and he will always have his problems with diving, and as everyone does, but he's the one who voices it. And I think at the same time, people know to ask about it because they know they're going to get a good answer from him, and he's going to go into detail, so that type of thing. But no, he's great in press conferences, Sean Dyche. I really enjoy being in them, and even in the Zoom ones, he's sort of, he's very relaxed and sort of chilled out most of the time. So yeah, no, it is one of them, and I understand why opposition fans do point to it, because I think he's made a few points. I think thinking back, the Arsenal game was last season at the Emirates was one where he did make a point, but it kind of blew out of proportion a little bit because he did say, "I'm not just referring to Arsenal in my answer," but then because it was against Arsenal, then it can get twisted by in certain ways. But I think he will have his problems with diving, and I think he's right, because the game, you don't want the game to go to silly places of where everything's a foul, and I think he's right in this day and age. You've got to remember he was a centre half. He put the big challenges in, and back in the days when a lot more was let go. So I think there's different, the game's changed though, and I think he understands that, but he doesn't want it to change too much, if that makes sense.
Yeah, I understand completely, and I do agree with a lot of the stuff that he says half the time. So he's fighting the good fight, I suppose. Let's have a look at what I've gone for the Arsenal side of things. The immediate thing to notice is the reversion to the back three for Arsenal, which of course Arteta is trying to mould Arsenal into that 4-3-3 once again, but it's not working. Against Aston Villa, we're cut open. Against Spurs, they just played the Mourinho counter-attacking system that completely ruined us. The Leeds game, we just weren't able to create enough chances, and the ones that we did create, we didn't take. And of course, the Wolves game again was they took the lead, and we just weren't able to break them down. And Arsenal at the end of last season played with this 3-4-3 style, and obviously won them an FA Cup at the end of the season as well. And we started the season with it against Fulham and was very creative. We won 3-0 at Craven Cottage. Well, I know it's only Fulham and it was their first game in the Premier League, but we did create a lot of chances in that game. And I just feel that whilst we don't have the personnel to play a 4-3-3 because we lack that real creative central spark, with Ozil not being selected in the squad and Arsenal ultimately not signing that creative spark in the midfield in the summer window, I think we need to revert back to the 3-4-3, play the system that the players are best suited to, and trying to pick up the points, because Arsenal are picking up nothing at the moment. We're not scoring and we're not picking up points, and it's important that Arsenal just play a system that suits the players that we have and gets the best players that we have into the team as well. Now, that means obviously that there are going to be some players that aren't going to be playing. Xhaka I've not selected because I think his form is in the ground at the moment. It's horrific. Thomas Partey is injured. The back line pretty much picks itself in a back three with Tierney, Gabriel and Holding. Tierney playing in that left centre-back role really suited him, playing those passes in behind for the left winger, which in this case is Aubameyang again. So many listeners and fans of the channel and of the team, of course, were calling for Aubameyang to play centrally, and it's just not worked. He's just not been able to get the chances, and that's not necessarily all his fault. The chances that we've created are not suited to him. And I'm going to come on to a question to you, Andy, about crossing in a second. But Ainsley Maitland-Niles playing on that left-hand side did really well at the end of last season, has played there this season to a good extent. Bellerin splits the fan base in half with his kind of lacklustre performances at times and his defensive frailties, but going forwards he is very effective. And then in the middle, Elneny and Ceballos being there is really key as well. I think Ceballos progressing the ball forwards and Elneny holding that central part of the midfield. Saka has to play because he's our best and most creative player, and Lacazette's form has seemingly risen ever so slightly in the last few games. So with the way that we're playing in general, any upturn in form of anyone, however small, I think needs to be put to the forefront of the 11. So Andy, looking at that, the first question is around crossing. Arsenal flung balls into the box like no tomorrow against Spurs. And if there's one team that I look at in the Premier League that are good at defending in the air and heading balls away, it is Burnley. So if you were let's say an insurgent for Arsenal in the Burnley camp, and you were to say, if there's one way to try and break Burnley down, it's not going to be crossing, is it? And how best do you think Arsenal should approach this game?
Yeah, it's definitely not crossing. It's sort of, I refer to James Tarkowski and Ben Mee as almost ball magnets. Right. They always seem to find themselves in the right position to clear across, whether that be whacking it, heading it. they always seem to find themselves in the right positions to do it. And it was one thing that, you know, because I've heard a bit about sort of Arsenal's crossing recently and how they're doing it a lot more. And that's sort of what I think Burnley would be pretty happy if that was what was happening, because they'd back themselves to consistently clear it. And when you've got Nick Pope, who's probably the most dominant goalkeeper, I'd say, sort of in terms of coming out and claiming crosses, you know, you are sort of, you're then hoping that you've got to hit a very, very good cross to cause them problems. I think the sort of key, I think, will be sort of Aubameyang, Maitland-Niles is sort of pace on the left. Robbie Brady and Matt Lowton aren't the quickest players. So if you can sort of try and hit balls over the top maybe, and sort of turn Burnley. That's very difficult to do because they don't sort of, you know, press very high, and therefore it's difficult to actually hit them over the top. I think the idea is to try and infiltrate, if you like, between the lines. Burnley's very much a 4-4-2, you know, solid structured base. They try and leave as little gap as possible between the centre back, sort of the back four and the forward midfield when defending from the 18-yard box. I remember at the Emirates last season, they did press Arsenal quite high, and if Arsenal try and play off in the back, I sort of expect Burnley to try and do that again, because it did work to an effect. The issue is when Arsenal did get past them, there was acres of space for Arsenal to stretch the game, and that's not what Burnley want. But I think what you're trying to find is can the likes of, if you're going to go with this system, can Aubameyang, can Saka, you know, pick up the little pockets in between the sort of midfielders and the defenders, and then Ceballos, you know, he can thread balls through to them, and then it's about, I guess, how you use your fullbacks and relying on Robbie Brady and Dwight McNeil, who have, you know, defensively, you know, make sure that they stay in shape and put the work in. You know, can you overload in those areas, I guess. I don't think crossing necessarily will be the answer, but I think it's one of those things with Arsenal where you look at it and they have got quality, and Aubameyang, we could on Monday morning easily, Aubameyang could have scored 2 or 3 in this game. It's one of those. I know he's been, you know, sort of miles off it, from sort of the levels he was setting, you know, sort of back end of last season, I guess, and has set throughout his career. But you sort of feel like it's one of those turning point games potentially for Arsenal where, you know, everything can just suddenly click. Burnley will obviously be open. That's not the case, and he can continue to make Arsenal toil going forwards, and they certainly won't make it easy. And I think the first goal in the game is sort of obvious as this sounds, will be very, very key. If Burnley can get it, then it changes it a lot. But I think Burnley, so I guess trying to play quickly as well and not slowing it. If you try and play quick, and try and, you know, expose Burnley's back four, then you've got a much better chance than building slowly and then allowing them to sort of set themselves. Because it's what you saw against City, is that they sort of every time Burnley made a mistake, City sort of countered it and punished them. And that's the key. If Burnley do make mistakes, which isn't usually very often against City, they were just off it. But, you know, if you do force them into a state, you've got to punish them. And it's the question of the way Arsenal are currently attacking, whether they can actually do that.
And I think that also, like, the way that Arsenal are in their form and in the way that they are failing to break teams down adds that little bit of extra confidence to the defenders, knowing that, well, you've got coming up against a side that is failing to score, and we want to make that run continue. And it is that little bit of extra motivation as well. Let's have a look at what some of you guys are saying in the chat box. Peter Renner says, what I want to see from the players against Burnley's low block is, as long as there is space, to take a few long shots instead of always trying to pass through, trying to hit them on maybe with a surprise effort. But Pope is one of the best, I feel, from those long range efforts. So it might not be the best idea against Burnley. Juan Felipe Palacio Rivera, our best named listener, says, I do not think he'll be back to the 3-4-3 because the transition to another formation is more complex. For me, you can be defensive with any formation if you press and keep the ball, which I understand. And I think also when you look at the amount of like fluidity that Arteta's tried to bring to the team in the way that the formation does change throughout games, that you have that level of defensiveness with playing 4 at the back, because it does change to a 3 or a 5 at times, but it's just not seemingly working with what he's doing right now. Now, Arsenal says, Tom, I would go with something different on Sunday, maybe the 4-2-3-1. But I feel that the 4-2-3-1's always been what we've tried in the last few weeks and just hasn't really worked. Let's have your predictions in the chat box then, and we'll go through some of those. Andy, let's get yours first. I mean, be as mean as you like. I can take it. I'm used to it now. What are you feeling ahead of the game?
I think I'm going to go with a 1-1. I get the feel. I mean, because Burnley themselves have been good defensively recently. So they started off poorly, but they started off sort of poorly in all areas of the pitch. And slowly, since sort of the West Brom game, so just after the first international break, they've built. Ben Mee's come back in, has helped massively. And they look like the team. I know, obviously, the City. They always lose 5-0 there, so it is what it is. But in the games against teams that that sort of either haven't been playing well, or you'd expect them to sort of be good, win against, or be good against the likes of the Brightons, the West Broms. They've been much better defensively, and Nick Pope is sort of on a sensational run of form at the moment. His save against Everton and Palace both in that sort of added time, as won Burnley points and saved points at the same time. I think equally Arsenal's defence it's been sort of the positive, I guess, is that whilst the attacking play hasn't been as good, the Gabriel's been excellent since he's come in. Be interesting to see how he matches up sort of physically with Wood and Barnes. I imagine will enter at some point to just annoy people. He likes annoying Arsenal. So it'll be interesting to see how he physically matches up against those two. But yeah, and Burnley do carry the carrying a threat. They weren't. But since Rodriguez has come back in against Palace and Everton, they've created some really good chances and not taking them. But the quality of the chances is getting a lot better. So they will back themselves to probably, at least create 1 or 2 that they may be taking. And you've always got to factor in set pieces with Burnley that, the strong, it's a strong asset of the game, and the deliveries from Westwood and McNeil cause problems. And, that's always something that they'll look to try and score from. So yeah, 1-1, but he easily, we could go a completely different way, and we could be sat here with it, and Arsenal could have clicked. But equally, it could get worse, and Burnley could nick it. Yeah. You never know.
Yeah, you don't. It's football, and anything can happen. I think this game, as with a lot of Arsenal games recently, is going to come down to an early goal. If Arsenal can get an early goal and force Burnley to then come out to try and find the equaliser, they might find those spaces in behind, which will really help them. Let's see what some of you guys are saying in the chat box. Christopher Fung says a 2-0 loss. He's still as confident as always.
That'll do, mate.
Yeah, I bet it would. Peter Renner says a boring 0-0. Jared Carver says 2-0 to the Arsenal. Easy Isle. Ed says 2-1 with a late winner. Iron Cub says 1-0 with an Arsenal penalty. That would be a painful game to witness. And he's saying that Iron Cub saying that he wants to see a 4-4-2. Peter Golding saying that 0-0. I think Arsenal's attack will be as muted as Tom's mic has been. I didn't realise how quiet I was. There's something wrong with this mic. I didn't realise. Maybe Andy's just really loud. Maybe that's what it is. The disparity between the two. Mohammed says Arsenal is more fluid with 4-2-3-1 as a formation. So there's lots of different ideas coming through. It'll be interesting to see obviously the lineup that Arteta chooses to go with. But I'm hoping that Arsenal can nick an early goal in the game and force Burnley to come out, in which case I still can't see us keeping a clean sheet. Our defensive form has not been great. And so I'm going to go for a 2-1 victory. I'm leaning on the side of like Ed was in the chat, maybe a late winner from the Gunners after a Burnley equaliser. But it's a really tactical, interesting fixture, I think, this one. And if Arteta comes out of this game without scoring a goal, let alone taking a win, the pressure on him from the fan base is only going to just escalate exponentially. So it's going to be an interesting one. But Andy, I appreciate you taking the time out of your evening. I also appreciate that the light shade you have got matches the pattern of the TGT border, which is quite fantastic. So appreciate that. Do you want to tell people where they can find you on social media and what you're going to be up to?
Yeah, so I work for The Athletic, so all my work, all Burnley stuff will be on there. Find me at @adjones_journo on Twitter, which is where I'll be tweeting about the game. Hopefully tweeting some goals for Burnley. That'd be nice, but we'll see. But yeah, that's where you'll find me, and that's where you'll find me work as well.
Awesome stuff. So make sure you check out Andy's stuff at The Athletic and The Athletic in general, which of course houses plenty of content, especially lots of Arsenal content with David Ornstein, Amy Lawrence and James McNicholas, and Art de Roche as well, who's recently joined up too. So make sure that you check that stuff out. I think there's a deal going on at the moment where it's like a really cheap subscription as well, isn't there? Is that going on right now?
There was recently, there was a Black Friday deal, but I'm not sure if that's running, but there's usually something. So if you have a look, you'll probably find something.
It is worth it. I'm not the one to subscribe to football content usually, but I made an exception for the content that goes on at The Athletic.
That's good.
It is fantastic. It genuinely is. It's a real pleasure. And we've had yourself, Andy, on before, and we've had Roshane as well on, and a few others of the writers. Amy Lawrence came on to review her book. So it's a great group of journalists, and I'm looking forward to seeing more content coming out from it soon. Make sure you drop a like on the video, people. I hope you've enjoyed it. If you have, make sure you subscribe if you're not new to the channel. But other than that, it's been an absolute pleasure to speak to you, as it always is, and we'll see you again very, very soon. And as always, up the Arsenal.